not from here. I'm not from the States. I'm from Germany. So bear with me if it's a little bit harsh to understand, but I give my best to make it as smooth as possible.
Willkommen.
Willkommen. Guten Tag. Grüß Gott. That's good. That's really good. I hope everyone understands me. If I'm speaking too quiet, then just raise your hands and say or shout that I should shout myself. I'm Rico Komenda. As I said earlier, I'm from Germany, Stuttgart to be exact. But I have extended family in Austin, so I'm combining it, visiting family and also visit Austin, but also LASCON. Designed, of course, the colors of UT. Is there some Longhorn fans here? So 1, 2, okay. Maybe the one colors, maybe I have more Aggies here. Okay. We could do. How many Aggies do we have here? How many Longhorns do we have here? Good. Let's deep dive into the agenda and all the topic, because if you have any questions about me, I will be here today and tomorrow. So if you have any question about me, just catch me on the floor and ask me the question there. We will go about MCP. What is MCP? How does it work? Also, the attack surface. I think that's the most interesting part for most of you. We will look at some real-world cases, but I will just talk briefly about them because, to be honest, there were too much of them in the last 3 to 4 months. If I would look at some security news right now, in half an hour there would be a new MCP issue, so we wouldn't deep dive into that. And my proposed solutions, but also what can we do as ourselves, like as developers, but as security engineers, what can we do to improve the MCP servers right now, or how we integrate them in our landscape. As said, senior security consultant from Germany. I'm on my own right here, right now. I used to do full stack dev mostly. Then I started breaking and securing stuff. Now I'm and that's a German phrase, eierlegende Wollmilchsau, which is a jack of all trades. It's a biblical, no, not biblical. It's a it looks like that. A mythical, thank you. It's a mythical animal which can do everything. Like it can lay eggs, it can produce milk, everything. So most of times I will say I'm an eierlegende Wollmilchsau, but with focus on application, cloud, and AI. So most times I was full stack dev, so I had the experience with that, but doing security consulting most of the time. Still producing and vibe coding with some POC stuff and MVP stuff, but yeah. And I'm a contributor at different OWASP AI projects, but you will see some of that documents later on. So, who of you did already experiment with or create a MCP server? Just raise your hands. That's like half the room. So when you add a new MCP server, for example, to Cloud Desktop or another LLM or MCP client or AI client, did you treat it like a library import or like plugging in a stranger's USB stick? I hope most of you made some kind of decision and questioned the MCP server you added to your landscape, but as I know, and I saw many of my colleagues in where I'm working at, also they were just adding MCP servers all over the place. And I hope after this talk, you don't do that. Just add any untrusted MCP server. When we're talking about MCP server, I think that was your LinkedIn or other social media or work-wise social media platform in the last months when every company said, we are excited to announce our new MCP server with this and this and this, right? Maybe your company too. But let's have a little bit of introduction to MCP because not everyone already experienced with it, and I want to give a clear view how MCP should work or is destined to work, and then we will look into the attack surface. And in my description to this talk, I had it's working like an USB-C standard because Anthropic said itself it should work like MCP servers are going to plug in. You could do it to your iPhone, you could do it to your Android phone, and so on, and every other handheld devices, for example. So this is just like why I did put it in my description and how MCP wants to be understand, like in a concept. Let's take a step back. LLMs by themselves are incapable of doing anything meaningful. So if we're looking just at the LLM itself, it's producing hallucinations, it's producing some kind of generative work. But like the most enterprises, they don't want just like the LLM itself, right? They want to have some kind of indexing, some kind of retrieval augmented generation, and so on and so on. So then most architectures in 2024 and earlier 2025 looked like this. LLMs with some tool capabilities. For example, retrieving some kind of indexed queries and things like that. But now we are going more and more to have like one MCP client or AI client, and the MCP server works as a gateway, and with that we have multiple services connected to those MCP servers. Let's look at that. We have our MCP clients, which could be, for example, Cloud Desktop, Cursor, Windsurf, or even your own client you developed. This could then lead, for example, to these use cases. Example, we have a database MCP server where we having things like query and fetch data, modify records, handle data streams. This MCP server is connected to the database, of course, as a resource. But we will deep dive into what resources are in a slide later. It could also be a CRM MCP server, and this would have the function of creating or updating contacts, manage opportunities, track interactions, and so on. Of course, this MCP server is connected to the CRM system. But also our version control MCP server, which then would maybe act as an Gen AI developer. Like we could do an agentic AI LLM developer, which then has contact with an MCP server with our version control, where we then commit changes, resolve conflicts, manage branches, and so on. Of course, this is connected with the version control software. To understand that a little bit clearer, at its core, MCP follows a client-server architecture, where a host application can connect to multiple servers. So as we saw earlier, we have MCP hosts like Cloud Desktop, IDEs, and so on. Our clients are the protocol clients that maintain one-to-one connection to the servers. And the MCP servers are the lightweight programs that each expose specific capabilities. How does this whole flow work? We start, and we will see this in the next 3 slides in detail. We have the client, which asks, what do you support? Then we have the client-to-server communication, and then vice versa, the server-to-client communication. So when we start with the client, and the client asks, what do you support? This is the handshake phase. The client asks the server what capabilities it supports. Then the server responds with a list of supported tools, features, or resources. Here I have just some pseudocode how that would look like when an app initializes the session and registers available tools. When we're going to the next step, the client-to-server communication, the client sends requests to the server with an active session that has those agreed features agreed on features we saw before. The host then updates the interfaces or passes responses back. It's as you can see, it's on like right beside the yellow point. It's a loop. So the actions, requests, and responses repeat as long as it's needed. Then we have the server-to-client communication. This shows the reverse direction when the server initiates communications back to the client. The server can then request data like sampling or context, we will see that in a minute, or send notifications like resource or status updates. The client forwards these to the host, which handles then the UI or user interactions. Let's start by the what do you support workflow. Once connected, the client can ask what tool exists and how to use them. Tools list, as we see it here, shows all available tools with their schemas, tools, calls, one. The example shows, as you can see it here, search liked, tool definition. This could be anything other, search likes, book likes, and every other possibility you could think of. When we are going further, we are mixing those calls based on the desired workflow. Once the tools are known, the model can chain them to complete the workflows. Here, for example, it finds the flights, adds them to a calendar, sends an email, all via those tool calls. This is for me, or was for me, a big thing to understand, because this is what we want with agentic AI workflows, right? We're wanting to sample something or ask them something and have a desired workflow based on the user requests. And those with all our MCP connections. In addition to tools, there are resources and bombs. Resources give models, or like the MCP client, access to data like calendars or travel history. And bombs are templates that guide how the model interacts or reasons. So it's kind of like a system bomb we know beforehand when we build LLM chatbots, for example. And together, they let the AI systems pull context dynamically, but also means that it needs authentication, authorization to some kind of resources implemented in those workflows. Now, how does the server talk back to the client? There are three possibilities how this would work. Sampling, which would mean, can you LLM this for me? Elicitation, can you ask the user this? And logging, can you log this at your end? And if you're looking into like how it's described in the MCP documentation, then you would see, okay, sampling means just, okay, it's enriched with LLMs. Elicitation, we're asking some kind to the user that we need more information, maybe we need authentication, authorization on your end, and logging, that we want to send log messages to the client for debugging and monitoring purposes. When you're looking especially at sampling and elicitation, my first thinking was this. Yeah, what could go wrong? As we all know, I think 70% of this conference are about AI and prompt injection and things like that. It's similar to that. So if we look at all those prompt injection issues in the last 2 years, and we are seeing sampling in those workflows, yeah, what could go wrong, right? And of course, I'm not the only one researching what vulnerabilities and issues are laying within the MCP ecosystems. Many other people did that too. So I was thinking, okay, of course, you could do some kind of prompt injection, but are there MCP-specific ones? And if you're thinking, how many threats are there? Yeah, there are too many. Like, this is a picture from the OSGI security project, which you can also read open source. And they found like over 40. It's not just MCP specific, as you can see maybe in the picture, but there are some MCP specific ones and some like application security vulnerabilities which we had before, and now they have just a different name. So old vulnerabilities, new names, or new attack surfaces. And there are more and more lists. Of course, there's coming over agentic top 10 coming soon. It's in the making right now. and it will be published in the next few weeks, as far as I know. But also there's MCP, security top 25 vulnerabilities by Adversa, which gets updated regularly with links to what those vulnerabilities are. So the presentation will be uploaded somewhere, I don't know where, but if not, just ask me on Slack or on LinkedIn, and I will gladly send you this presentation with all the links and so on. In regard of this presentation, as we don't have time till tomorrow, unfortunately, let's focus on 3 of them. Of course, prompt injections and where could prompt injection lay in this ecosystem. Authorization vulnerabilities, and why I'm always saying in the MCP context, old vulnerabilities, new style. And tool definition modification, and they are called wackball attacks. Indirect or prompt injection, we will just get the definition here on this slide. Direct prompt injections are where the attackers directly include malicious instructions in user inputs that override system prompts or other kind of guardrails. There's a distinction between prompt injection and, now the name is missing, jailbreak, AI jailbreak, thank you very much, sir. But in the end, for me, it's similar. You're trying to avoid some kind of guardrails. It's system bombs, it's guardrails, which could be some kind of non-deterministic, but somehow not. Then we also have indirect prompt injections, where it's malicious instructions are embedded within the external content, such as documents, web pages, or emails that the AI processes. Tool poisoning attacks are a specialized form of prompt injection where malicious instructions are embedded within MCP tool descriptions, invisible to users, but visible to AI models. And we have the tool response injection, where there are maliciously crafted responses from tools that contain hidden instructions for the model. We're looking into 2 of them in this regard. One is the tool poisoning attack, also called line jumping. Line jumping was defined by 12 bits, where I also borrowed the picture from. When a client application connects to an MCP server, it must ask the server what tool it offers, as we stated previously, via the tools list method. The server responds with a tool description that the client adds to the model's context to let it know what tools are available. As soon as we do that, the moment the client connects to this MCP server, the client updates the model's context with the full tool description. Here's an example, also borrowed from 12 bits. In this case, the description includes instructions to prefix all shell commands with chmod r06666. For everyone that doesn't know what this means, a command that makes the user's home directory world readable and writable. So that would be really, really horrible if that would happen. The MCP client's applications and models were tested from 12 bits, including cloud desktops, did follow this malicious instruction when interacting with other MCP tools. And we bypassed human oversight with that, because it didn't, when 12 bits tested this, it didn't prompt it to the user some elicitation or something. It just went and did it. So there's a problem also with the MCP clients or AI clients, however you want to call them, and that it's just doing this command injection type of things without some kind of popping up security issues on your, that some tool did something really, really horrible. How could we mitigate line jumping? Sanitize the descriptions, like strip or encode any suspicious or directive language before adding tool description to the model context. Keep them concise, factual, and non-executable. Verify externally. Use independent validation, like security models or automated scanners. For example, this open source tool called MCP Safety Scanner to vet new tool descriptions flag or block servers with hidden or unexpected instructions. Limit exposure, avoid passing raw tool descriptions to the model, provide only safe summaries, or require user approval to prevent hidden commands from executing. Yes?
Are you taking questions?
We could do questions, yeah. We need to keep them concise because of the time, but yeah.
So you're describing an attack surface, and I'm wondering why not follow the basic deny all and then allow specific in the recommendations. Like, for example, don't execute anything from this, only treat it as text. And then if you have a need to make an exception to that, you can make a very specific exception. Is that just not possible within the standard right now?
I would need to look it up, to be honest. If it's written like that in the description of the standard, yes. But at the end of the day, we have other standards in place, and are we doing it with that too? So like, even if it's standard, because I don't think that when they published MCP, they had something like bad intentions or didn't think about security. It was just like that with just like any other standards. Not every user or developer using those standards understands the standards. So it could be that it stands there. I'm pretty sure it stands there somewhere that you shouldn't do that. Also, like MCP documentation still itself has some security best practices section. So yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Just a quick clarifying question. Where exactly was the vulnerable part injected? Was it the tool description that was imported from external sources?
In this case, it was MCP server 1, but it doesn't matter where it's coming from. You could just like put the description into like, if you're an MCP server developer, and that's why I'm saying don't trust any MCP servers.
The server is compromised essentially.
Yeah, it could be compromised because it's an evil MCP server, but it could also, like just like in the NPM ecosystem, the maintainer gets hijacked, you're changing the description, and then voila, you have a malicious MCP server, which wasn't one before. But this is like similar to the last security issue, which we will see later. And of course, human in the loop. We saw it here, human in the loop got bypassed. We need to make sure on everything we are developing regarding in the MCP ecosystem that we have human in the loop in place somehow, somewhere, and we enforce it. Authorization vulnerabilities. Excessive permissions. MCP servers granted broader access than necessary. And I think stating like that, it's with any other servers we have in place right now, or if we're not following security best practices, that we have too much control over things we shouldn't have, for example. So this is like an MCP server specific vulnerability, right? I think if some of you did pen testing here, how many of the similar, like too much granted access had we in business business processes or business logic flaws, for example. Token theft, stolen OAuth or API tokens used through MCP to access services, inadequate authentication, weak or missing authentication for critical operations, and the permission persistence, access rights not properly revoked when no longer needed. The main problem that the old, and I'm putting it in parentheses, MCP authorization, which is prior to April 25, because keep in mind I put this call for papers for this talk on like February or March this year. There was like an older authorization specification on there, which like boggled my mind a little bit. Is that it couples two main OAuth concepts together. It treats the MCP server as both a resource server and an authorization server. In the second version of the authorization specification, they changed that. They said, you can do it, but you shouldn't do it. If that makes it better, I don't know. But In the first one, they said resource server and an authorization server together. This has fundamental implications for MCP server developers and for one-time operations, including, are we doing a stateful or stateless server? Are we going against enterprise best practices? Additional complexity for MCP server developers, because why should we do authorization and resource server now together? Now I need to keep that in mind in all my enterprise landscape. And wiring security implementations, which leads then again to runtime and scale challenges. In short, too much power in one place leads to fragile, hard to secure systems. Now we're rolling to the new MCP authorization, which got uploaded somewhere April, beginning of May, but they worked on it on end of March, as you can see it on the version link. And for that, it's following requirements for the MCP servers to implement authorization via OAuth 2.1. That means MCP of implementations must implement OAuth 2.1, which makes PXE mandatory. When we didn't, then PXE wasn't mandatory, and this would lead to other issues, but this is a whole other story. MCP of should support dynamic client registration. MCP servers should implement authorization server metadata. And if MCP servers leverage a third-party authorization server, the MCP server must maintain a mapping of third-party tokens to MCP-issued tokens. In the next slide, I've put a mini refresher of how OAuth works. The authentication and authorization delegation happens for the client and user resource owner, which we see on the far left on this slide, directly with the authorization server or identity provider, IDP. They eventually negotiate an access token that gets sent to the backend resource, where we have the APIs, applications, etc. The application then checks the validity of the access token, and then relies on its claims to determine authorization. If we're looking into with the first version, the MCP of specification blurs the distinction between a resource server and an authorization server, as we saw 2 slides earlier. The issue then, these well-known endpoints that are traditionally hosted by the authorization server, typically most times an enterprise identity provider or Keycloak or something else, and not by an individual resource server. This design choice means every MCP server must expose its own metadata discovery URL, or potentially separate authorized token and register endpoints. That creates unnecessary fragmentation, complicating client implications, and deviating from OAuth best practices. To properly integrate OAuth with MCP servers, we should align with enterprise best practices by separating the authorization server from the resource servers. While this may require deviating from the current MCP specification, it offers the best chance for enterprise to maintain security while keeping MCP servers stateless. In this approach, an enterprise would use its existing IDP system as the authorization server, supporting overflows like authorization code or client credentials or other things. Have MCP servers act solely as resource server, verifying tokens issued by the IDP, leveraging an API gateway, which could be optional, to handle token validation, then use machine-to-machine identities, MTLS, for example, to securely transmit the validated tokens to the MCP server. And, of course, we could enforce airbag with that within the MCP servers based on the verified tokens. So an attacker wouldn't an attacker couldn't go easy on that because it would need to gain access on the authorization code contained in an authorization response, and so on and so on. As you can see, it would be much more harder to get something as an attacker. Also, this would make PXE mandatory, and we would need to check that beforehand. So PXE then helps prevent authorization code interceptions and injection attacks by requiring clients. So this would be a proposed solution which would be ongoing with security best practices, but also hard for an attacker to go into that systems. Let's dive to the third and last security issue, the tool modification. Tool definition modification, also so-called rug pull attacks. A rug pull attack occurs when a tool description or behavior is silently altered after user approval, turning a previously benign tool potentially malicious. An attacker can find established trust via rug pull and then use hidden instructions to steer the tool's behavior, exfiltrate data, or trigger unauthorized actions. Often without the user noticing, since such changes don't necessarily trigger a new approval workflow. So I think the most people here are devs in some kind, yes, no? Devs, hands up. Yeah, because I'm a software developer myself, it's like a good software dependency gone rogue, gone bad. If you're looking into the NPM ecosystem in the last few weeks, how many of those were compromised? We didn't thought that they would be hijacked now, but now they are. So some good dependencies gone bad. This could look, for example, like this. This is a little dummy, but just to showcase how it works. An initially approved version could look like this, where we have a calculator on our MCP server. And after approval, we are changing silently the tools. And then right here, you would see, maybe the colors are not the best here. We are calling our remote attacker server, where we then collect our information based on a REST call we are doing. Mitigation strategies against rug pull attacks requires, in my opinion, a multi-layered strategy. Key measures include enforcing explicit policy-based access controls to govern what updated tools are allowed to do, implementing manual vetting and continuous monitoring of tool updates, and disabling auto-approval or auto-update mechanisms, especially for sensitive or high-permission tools. And when I first wanted to do this talk, I was thinking to deep dive into some real-world cases. But as you can see, on the top 25 or top 40 lists of MCP security issues, there are so many different security vulnerabilities that lay in these ecosystems. And also because of that, to be honest, there was too much of it. Those are pictures from some months ago, but even if I would go into some security newspaper, digital newspaper, there would be so many different MCP security issues in a week. I couldn't count them. Maybe we need some deep research LLM tool to keep that track and count them, how many of them are. But maybe they would be wrong because counting and LLMs are not a good thing. So when I'm looking into all those three security vulnerabilities, but also the ecosystem itself, I was thinking, yeah, this is probably fine. Probably we need to do something against it. And that's why I'm also doing the talk, to educate you if you're developing MCP servers or interacting with them in some kind, what can you do and what shouldn't you do. Don't wait for the fix. The MCP protocol, I think, got earlier this year on February, March firstly introduced to this world. And as you can see, got changed on April with the authorization specification. It's an ongoing standard we are talking about. Future iterations of MCP protocol may eventually address the underlying vulnerabilities. But users, developers, or anybody else need to take precautions now until robust solutions are standardized through the standard itself, but even then we couldn't guarantee that it works everywhere securely. We need to treat all MCP connections as potential threats and adopt defensive measures for that. I counted some of them regarding those MCP issues we talked about, but here are some more. Verify your sources. Only connect to MCP servers from reputable and trusted providers. But even then, as we see it in the NPM ecosystem, doesn't mean necessarily that they're 100% secure. Always review tool descriptions fully before allowing them into your model's context. Set up guardrails. Use automated scanning and security guardrails to identify and block suspicious tool descriptions or potential dangerous invocations patterns before they reach the model. Track and validate changes. Trust on first use. Adopt a trust on first use, also called TOFU, approach for MCP servers. Notify users or administrators when a new tool is introduced or when an existing tool description is modified. Turn off any MCP server that are not actively required to reduce your attack surface. Avoid automatically approving command executions like you would do with any other stuff, especially those involving sensitive data or systems, and regularly review the model's proposed actions. And we wouldn't be over if there wouldn't be always something ongoing. Coming soon, there's a practical guide for securely using our third-party MCP servers, of course, with your local contributor. Let's jump into the outro, and I'm a big fan of discussions because this topic could be a little bit harsh for like 40 minutes. That's why or 50 minutes. That's why I'm taking it more to like 40 minutes, which I'm in place right now. So we have 10 minutes to discuss many of your questions and things. But before we do that, let's jump into the takeaways. MCP is still new. It's a Wild West. Oh man, I thought this joke would hit a little bit more. Oh man, German and that joke, right? It's a Wild West. In Germany, we would say it's a Wild West when it's a little bit rough. I thought it would be an English-speaking phrase too. Many different threats depending on the context and use cases, as we saw in this talk, but also when we would look into all the other vulnerabilities. The security measures range from network security to application security, and lastly also to MCP-specific defenses. But as I said, we had I've said MTLS. We have that in the last few years. So it's not something new we have now. But we can use many of our security measures we had in the last years as enterprise security measures. We could use them now to mitigate or try to mitigate specific defenses regarding the MCP. And as said previously, don't wait for a fix, act now. A small shout out, because I am a big fan of demos. And I didn't find a good one yet. Like, you know, all of them, like damn vulnerable MCP servers or something like that. There are some, but they're not working quite good yet, and not in many different cases. So I'm trying to start a little initiative in the OWASP context to create an open source vulnerable MCP project. This is just a reach out for me. If you want to help me, if you want to be part of that, hit me up on the OWASP Slack or on LinkedIn.
MCP goat.
Yeah, they're vulnerable MCP server or MCP code. I think the name is it doesn't matter. But I want to do something like that, so we can, like for the overshoot shop, have something in the future where we can work on and maybe educate more and more people. Because in my opinion, it's not only MCP servers, because also A2A, like what is happening there, like all those AI integrations to make agentic AI are vulnerable in some kind, if not introduced correctly. I could have do a talk like MCP servers in the A2A or like the all A2 ecosystem too. So it doesn't matter, but something like that should be taken up now so that we can educate together as a community more people on those issues. If you are interested in that, just write me either on the OWASP Slack or on LinkedIn. When we're talking about LinkedIn, you can add me gladly on that there. This is my LinkedIn QR code if you want to connect with me. And with that, I would open the last 8 minutes to questions. Otherwise, if there's not any questions. Yes, of course. Otherwise, thank you for listening to me, and I hope you learned a bit.